Hello and welcome to Property Mastermind Podcast, episode 192. Today we're talking about the importance of due diligence in your property development. We're going to unpack a few of the key things you need to look out for, but even those small things that really matter when it comes to purchasing a property and making sure you tick all the right boxes so you don't end up buying yourself a lemon. Let's jump on into episode 192. Hello and welcome to episode 192. I'm Hilary Saxton, my co-host or my other host or my partner in crime or my business partner or all of those things, Bob Andersen. Hey Bob, welcome.
Oh, thanks Hilary, great to be here. What a great day.
Well, it is a great day because the cyclone's passed. So if you listened to last week, that was heading toward everybody. Some people had a bit of a mission. It was a bit outrageous, northern New South Wales and the lower of southeast Queensland, parts of Brisbane. But we hope you're all well and safe and back in your homes now. And yeah, or if you're not, you can at least listen to 192 podcasts, 192 podcasts. What are your thoughts on that, Bob?
I can't believe we're so close to 200. I can remember getting excited when we were close to 100. Thinking, wow, that's been a milestone. Now we are, look, nearly 200.
Oh, amazing. It's kind of, I can't believe it either, really. But anyway, before we kick into the actual podcast itself, I'm giving away the book, Property Millionaires Exposed this week, Marilyn Peterson, On the Way to You. And thanks for the chat earlier this week. Now, Bob, as usual, what is your tip?
Oh, well, my tip is, don't give up. Because I've been chasing somebody for a while, that a person I really need to contact, because it was important to make contact with them because of where it could lead. And I sent an email, then I didn't get a response. 2 days later, I sent another email, then I sent a text to say that I've sent an email following the other email. Then I tried to ring the person, left a message. Then I sent another email, this is over a period of about a week, followed by another text. And bingo, I got a reply to the text. Oh, I haven't received any emails. He said, I've had trouble with my email server or whatever it is that does it for you. And I'm thinking, yeah, but there was a text or two. But the point is I didn't give up. You know, a lot of people would have. And I can tell you that the result that's come from that has been fantastic.
That's kind of would come under the banner of blooming amazing, really, I'd just almost say.
Well, determination.
Yes, yeah. And that's property development, really, isn't it? We've often talked about the tenacity. We always talk about the importance of connections, but not giving up. And you obviously didn't. And I was living your frustration. I haven't heard from him, and I've been reaching out, and you've got me on your shoulder, trying to come up with positive reasons why, thinking, God, wish he'd just blow an answer. But to be fair, pretty much everybody from Tuesday last week was a little bit hyper-focused on the potential cyclone hitting. So he wasn't in the impacted area. So we don't know. It could have had a bit to do with that as well. Even ourselves, we were a bit distracted. So there you go. It could have been that, I'm thinking. Bob, I want to talk about the importance of due diligence today. And I want to kick off with a wee story that really feeds well into this podcast this week. I have a lot of conversations with people that want to talk to me about the education programs that we have, or they want to invest in our projects. So I spend a lot of time talking to people on the phone. In fact, sometimes I feel like my phone is attached to my body. I go to walk home to have lunch perhaps, and my phone rings, and then I'm on the phone. I just live on it, really. But I was having a conversation, it was actually last year, with a guy who rang up, and it was after, so he didn't come and do education with us, but this can often happen. People will ring us afterward when they found themselves in trouble. And he had found himself in trouble because he hadn't followed through and done the proper due diligence on his property development. So and just really hear this, he'd mostly done it. He's kind of winged a bit it, but he'd winged the bit around the flood zoning, which is quite pertinent to now because there's a lot of flooding about to happen and happening in Queensland and New South Wales, northern New South Wales. But he hadn't done enough due diligence, and he was caught with a site that had too many flooding overlays and was now really struggling, and he wanted to offload it. And he rang us to ask for advice. Well, my first question was, well, I don't actually say. I usually want to know, well, did you do anything, or did you just Google this, or what have you put yourself forward to learning? Because I believe that would be part of your due diligence. You need to actually know what you need to know, and then really committing to going through the process properly instead of just thinking, that'll be right. And it had turned into one of those for him. So we did the best we could to help him, but there was really not much that we could do. He'd already gone too far. So let's have a chat, Bob, today about the really important key areas, not all of them, but some of the massive ones that cannot be overlooked when it comes to due diligence. And I want to start with, if you could define due diligence in property development and just explain to us, what you really need to evaluate before purchasing a site.
Yeah, interesting words, due diligence, because we use those not just in property development. It could be where you're looking at buying some shares and you've got to do due diligence on the company, whatever it is. So it's really checking it out to see if there's any issues. In property development, that's really what it is, because lots of things can pop up that could either make a project more expensive or even totally derail it. And much better to know that before you buy the site than after you buy the site. So really important. It's not something you can do half of. You just said about somebody there that you'd spoken to who did a certain amount of due diligence. You may as well do no due diligence as do half due diligence. You've got to be thorough. And that's where a really good checklist even could help. Had he been educated a bit more, he may have been able to go through and tick all the boxes. There's a pretty important box he didn't tick, unfortunately. You can't always get out of a deal, if you make that sort of mistake. So yeah, critically important. So what it's about pretty simply is when you're looking at a development site, I don't look at it on what makes it good. I play the devil's advocate and say, what makes it bad? What could derail this? It's not negative because it's a positive thing to do due diligence, but what you're really trying to do is find problems, find faults, and not glaze over, not being emotional and say, I really want to buy this, and that'll make you maybe neglect some issues that you really should be taking into account.
Bob, do you think mostly people would dive in and become either, is it more emotional reasons that they don't do full due diligence? Do you think it's more emotional? Do you think it's more lack of knowledge, or do you think it's more laziness? What would be the most common?
Lack of knowledge for sure. Yeah. I mean, I've seen in over 40 years of development, I've seen a lot of people get into trouble. Bump into them, as you say. We get phone calls from people out of nowhere, really, who've made mistakes and hoping that we can help them. So really, it's a lack of knowledge is the biggest thing. They don't, like you just said before, they don't know what they don't know. And how are you going to do due diligence if you don't know exactly all the things that you need to look for?
So the key areas, Bob, what's your first go-to on DD? Can we call it DD from here on in?
DD, sounds good.
We're going to go DD for the acronym lovers.
Drunk driving, no.
Oh, no, not drunk. No. So what's the first one that you always do first?
I think you've got to start at the basics, really, and that is the zoning of the land. And that's based on, obviously, what you want to do. So what do you want to do? Do you want to do maybe a 2-lot subdivision? Do you want to do a duplex? Do you want to build some townhouses? Maybe sometime in the future you want to build apartments. These are all dictated by the zone. And so each council area has divided up all the land into zonings. And some are residential, some might be industrial, commercial, business, there's all types of zonings. So assuming we're doing a residential development, each area, residential area, will have different zonings. They're often related to density. Like you might have a low level zoning, the first one. That might be where you have one house and one block of land. That's pretty simple. The next one up could be potentially a duplex zoning. And that can vary from council to council, but it could be when you get a certain size lot, you could do a duplex in a particular zoning. Next one up could be townhouses. That's a different zoning again. And so pretty important. If you want to do townhouses, you look for the townhouse zone, whatever it is in that council. And I've seen people buy a block of land to do townhouses simply because I said, oh, look, it's big enough. It's big enough to do 4 townhouses. Yeah, it might be, but maybe you can only build one house on it, or maybe you can only cut it into 2 lots. And so, zoning is always the first one.
So basically zoning stands for the rule that council wants it to happen, like what the rule they've applied. And the thing with zoning, There are so many different types, aren't there? And different states have different names, and they are all incredibly different.
Yeah. The good thing is you only really need to know the zoning in the council area where you're looking. So it doesn't really matter that there might be 20 different names for townhouse zonings around Australia. It's the one that matters is where you're looking in your patch. So that's what you need to get familiar with.
And Bob, how often does zonings change? We hear, and for people listening, once you start following property development, getting into it, you'll realise that zonings can change, and potentially on occasion you can change your zoning. Could you just explain those?
Well, yeah, if you were to change the zoning or get permission to change, it's called a rezoning, obviously. Generally, that won't happen in sort of urban built-up areas because they're very tightly controlled by council. Typically, whenever I've done a rezoning, it's been out on the fringes. We've got larger parcels of land that you might get rezoned from semi-rural to residential, that sort of thing. However, closer in those urban areas, in those infill areas, which is where we tend to develop, sometimes council will change them. If it's an area where it's one house per lot, you're not going to get one lot rezoned to townhouses. I can tell you that you're not going to get a set of precinct like that. But sometimes councils do, and quite often when they change the zoning, they actually what we call upzone. So they make it more dense because there is a big pressure on councils, often from state governments, to increase the density in areas. In other words, where there's one house at the moment, they like the idea of being able to either turn it into, let's say, a duplex or even 3 or 4 townhouses. And so that's upping the density, and that's making better use of the existing infrastructure. Because when you do that, let's just say you have a block of land with one house and you turn it into 4 townhouses. Now there's more people can inhabit that, let's call it an 800 square metre lot. More people can inhabit that now, but you don't have to build more roads. The road's already there. You don't have to, put more electrical power poles or anything in or underground power. It's already there. The sewer mains are there, the stormwater main, everything's there. Even the parks are there, the schools are there. So it's not a big financial impost on the governments on infrastructure. And that's a lot of the reason why they want to up the densities. The other thing is the shortage of land. You can't keep spreading out forever because, you hit the ocean, you hit mountains, and so in a way we've got to make better use of the land. And so there's often there's always a pressure from state governments on councils to do that.
Actually, that brings me to a thought. We've got the amazing Kyle, the accidental developer in our community. Hey, Kyle, because I know you're always listening, and he's listening on double speed, everybody, because he just loves the fastness. But when he went for his subdivision, did they rezone that, or was it already zoned at what he ended up putting on there? Yeah,
so Kyle's zoning was okay for a subdivision, and so he bought a house on a larger block, and all he really wanted to do was to cut it into 2 lots.
To put his mother-in-law on the other side.
Yeah.
That was the reason.
Yeah, for his mother-in-law to build a house on one lot and for him to retain his house on the other lot. But council really didn't want him to do that because they saw that as an underutilisation of the land. And sometimes they can be pretty pushy about that. And they said, no, we'd like you to subdivide it into smaller lots. And so that started him on his road to investigating what he could do. And as we know, he ended up with a 13-lot subdivision.
But was it zoned for that already, or did they change the zoning when he went in and when he applied?
No, it was zoned that you could do it.
Right.
Yeah.
But he didn't actually want to do it, but then they made him do it.
He didn't really understand zonings.
Yeah.
He knew he had a big enough parcel and assumed he could cut it into 2 lots. And that's when he went to council and found out, well, they really wanted him to subdivide it into more lots.
And interesting that you say about the infrastructure being available when it's already higher density, because he's had to put some of the infrastructure in, hasn't he? So that's very the council sort of making use of a developer, which they kind of do to get their way, isn't it?
Well,
a little bit of it.
A little bit, because the services were there. So he didn't have to, for instance, bring the water or the sewer up from a mile down the road, or should I say 1.6 kilometres.
That's for me.
The services were close to his large site, what you call the parent site, the large one. But yes, as he subdivided, as you always do with a subdivision, you have to connect the services to each individual lot, and you had to bring a little road in as well. So, yeah, there were construction costs involved in creating those 13 lots. But gee, hasn't he done well out of it? I think?
Oh, and isn't he a machine now? He started off as a rookie, now he's the master. So yeah, that's Kyle, the accidental developer. But that's the zoning was already there. I just wondered as you were talking about zoning. Anything else to cover legal and zoning checks? What other legal issues maybe that might have an impact if you don't cover them off? Would that be things like, I'm thinking, that'll come under environmental. What would be legal?
Well, think about when you do searches on a parcel of land. What are you looking at? Well, a title search. Things can pop up on that. There could be an easement, for instance, and usually you can't build a building on an easement. You might be able to build a driveway. You might be able to park a car, but you can't build a building typically. And so that'll show up on a search. Sometimes there's other hindrances and covenants. There could be a covenant registered on the title. I've seen them where there's a covenant on height, not just the normal height restrictions that a council might have in a particular zoning, but there could be encumbrances on land that's even, shall I say, more of an encumbrance than what the council planning scheme. And so, those sorts of title searches will show up. If you like legal, they're legal, they're searches. Particularly, easements. There could be a strip of land, for instance, along the front where council at some time in the future might want to claim it for road widening, let's say. These are the sorts of things that should show up when you do a search. So we just call them legal aspects, but they can make a big difference if you're not aware of them.
Yeah. Okay. And then what about financial due diligence? What would you put under the list of things that come under financial due diligence? Gosh, that's really hard to say. Financial due diligence. For those listening, have a go.
Just say FISO like we do.
Yeah. FISO due diligence. But I think it's saying FISO DD. There we go.
FISO DD.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's something close to our heart, isn't it? Feasibilities, because we're constantly doing them and teaching people how to do them. The numbers don't lie in property development. In fact, you probably heard me say before in one of our 191, the numbers don't lie. It's all about numbers, property development, because it has to make a profit, and it has to make a suitable profit, not just for you, but for your financier as well. And obviously you want to know if it makes a profit. I mean, you don't want to buy a site that makes a loss. You don't want to buy a site that doesn't make profit or even enough profit. It's too risky. You're not doing it for practice. And so the numbers are really important. The financial feasibility analysis, if you want to use a long term, critical, very important. And you've got to get it right, and you've got to learn how to do it.
I think it's something that people really don't fully grasp the importance of. You spend how many, we don't even know how many FISOs you've done in your time, and we're looking at more development sites at the moment, at things we're looking at doing, and then just 3 of us on a call unpacking a feasibility, going through, all checking. So it is critical that every single thing is on there, and I suppose, you're right, it's just DD on the FISO. Yeah. Are there any other costs on a feasibility that are likely to be more likely left out where developers, especially new developers, find themselves in trouble?
Well, look, there's 3 big costs in a feasibility. It's what you pay for the land, what it costs to build it, and of course your sale price, which is an important one. Usually if you're wrong in a big way, it's one of those big numbers, but there's lots of other costs, and it's back to you don't know what you don't know. And when I've seen some feasibilities from people that are inexperienced, they haven't been educated yet, and we often meet those people, but they're the people that we train, of course, is they just, something as simple as GST. I mean, that's, most of the costs in a property development are GST inclusive. That's 10%. Like you keep being wronged by 10% everywhere, that's going to have an effect. They underestimate timing. They make things a lot faster on their feasibility than reality.
That'll be me. They
turn a 22-month project into a 14-month project and reduce the interest by a lot, and wow, this looks good. Or, it's just back to, it can be a whole range of things, either not understanding all the costs that are involved in a property development and leaving them out. That's going to make a big difference. It's, making it a shorter time period than it really is. It's just getting those big numbers wrong as well. I've seen some shockers, even on build costs, where people just pluck a happy number out of the sky. And if it's low, it's going to make a big difference to your feasibility. It's going to make a bad one look good.
And there's more to a feasibility than just those 3 numbers. Like Bob said, the order, the amount of time things take, all of that's impacted massively. once you sort of work with people learning feasibilities, it becomes really, I don't know, you realise the impact of learning. So that's probably something you really need to nail first, really, before you start doing any due diligence. Otherwise, you're wasting your time on the other stuff. You need to. Would you start with oh no, you'd start with zoning, or you'd start with the numbers and then you'd go back?
Well, I start with the other stuff that we're talking about. Like if it's the wrong zoning, who cares what the numbers are? It doesn't matter. You can't do it. You know, like I said before, if it's a zoning where you can only build one house on one lot and you can't build townhouses, what's the point in doing numbers? You can't do it. You can't do townhouses. So those first things, I always say zoning, size, and sometimes frontage, you know, because it could have the right zoning, but it might be too small. It could be that in your particular council, I'm just making it up, they might say, well, look, you need this particular zoning for townhouses, but you need an 800 metre lot. Well, you might have the right zoning, but you're looking at a 600 metre lot. Well, don't bother.
Save yourself the time.
So don't worry about the numbers. Don't even bother starting.
And I want you to cover off now on site and environmental factors when it comes to doing due diligence.
Yeah, well, that can often be mixed up. If you're talking about environmental, you don't get lots of environmental problems on infill blocks where, you know, it's within a suburb, there's already a house there, there's people there. But you certainly can if you start, you know, working around the fringes and maybe on larger projects.
Like that big frog one that you had that problem.
Oh,
You haven't told that story for a while.
No, the golden bell frog.
Yes.
The $2 million frog on a large project I worked on. Yeah, we found one bell frog in the environmental audit, and he consumed a lot of land. There's quite a lot of land we weren't allowed to build on because of young froggy. But you know, there's plenty of environmental things out there on on larger blocks, less so. Or perhaps you know I've built a couple of times on former service stations. You know, there's environmental issues there with soil contamination potentially. You might remember the project we did at the old lolly factory, where when we knocked down the old lolly factory, we to build some apartments.
And you found lollies?
Didn't find any lollies. Oh. I thought the worst contamination we'd find would be, you know, say sugar, you know, which is not a big contaminant. But they found arsenic and a whole heap of things. And we thought, what the goodness? That, you know, this was just an old lolly factory. What we didn't know is that next door, which was currently some nice offices, back in the 60s, it was a paint shop and it burnt down. And all the chemicals and so forth from this paint shop flowed downhill underneath the lolly factory, and there they sat for like 50 years.
And does that turn into arsenic, Bob? Old paint?
Oh, God knows. You know, there's lead and all sorts of stuff in old paint. You know, this is back in the 60s. And they found quite a few contaminants. And like on the surface, you say, well, it's just an old lolly factory. What are you going to get? Like sugar and water, and what are you going to get under there? But not knowing at the time.
Bob, I don't think I knew that story.
Oh, there's plenty you don't know. You've heard a lot of them, I know.
Yeah. That's
now, there's nothing you could do.
No.
There's nothing you could do in your due diligence to know that, because I didn't. But it popped up. Now, it was a decent-sized project, and we were able to absorb it as a cost because we had to remediate that land far more than we thought. We'd had an allocation in, but it wasn't enough to deal with that. But like that's something out of left field you couldn't account for. Like, who's going to go back 40, 50, 60 years and see what used to be beside it, and did it burn down, and did stuff run down the hill? Like
the actual conductor type personalities, all the high C's from this point forward, that Alyssa Fraser will. She'll be
get a historian.
She will get a historian involved, and she will go back
through all the old newspapers
and make sure there's been no fire. The people that love to check on every detail, they will definitely be looking for old lolly factories or past fires.
Yeah, but like I said, I've done a couple of service stations, because remember in the old days, well, no, you wouldn't, you're too young, but when I was young, there was a...
Flash would get you everywhere, Bob.
There was a shop on every corner, and there was a service station on every other corner. And of course, these days, they have much bigger service stations, but less of them. And so a lot of the old service station lots were redeveloped, either as, you know, small retail shops, or even in some cases, you know, housing. And so decontamination, that's an environmental thing, but yeah, you don't come across the environmental issues a lot, but you do other issues. I think you mentioned site issues and environmental. So if I go to site issues, you know, a common one, particularly at the moment, is flooding. You know, and particularly in areas where you get high rainfalls, like for instance, I did a lot of development in Brisbane because I lived there for quite a while, and you can get a lot of rain in a hurry. you can get, 100 mil in an hour in a really heavy deluge, and all of a sudden it creates one thing, overland flow, where the water flows over the land. It's not actually a flood, but it's where the pipes can't handle that much water so fast. They can't get it away, and you'll see the grates bubbling up in the in the road, and so it flows overland, and you can't impede that flow. So that's overland flow. That can be an issue, and obviously flooding, particularly if it's near low land, if it's near a creek or river or whatever. There are other things you need to look at, because councils around Australia have different attitudes towards land that floods, but quite often you can't even build on it. You can't necessarily go and fill it. Like, it could be a real problem. There's maps to check it out. There's flooding maps, and it was just part of the due diligence. I mean, if it's near a river or a creek, that's obviously something that you want to look at.
Well, give me an example of a project where strong due diligence saved the developer. And I'm thinking you probably. What's probably been the deal that you thought was absolutely going ahead? It was epic. It was ticked every box, and then last minute you found something. Or have we had a mentoring student, one of those ones that was all the way, and then, whoa, lucky that didn't go ahead. I'm actually thinking of somebody that they interviewed. I don't know what the story was. You will.
Well, you tell me.
No, when he joined the mentoring program, he had 2 sites he came to, and he was about to buy them, and he said he made his money back on the mentoring program by not purchasing the 2 sites he was going to purchase, because they both were terrible. But I don't know what they were. I just remember you telling me you stopped them. But can you remember?
I know who you're talking about. I just can't remember the exact details of that one. But while you were talking about flooding, my mind went back to a site that I looked at, and it was in a built-up area. It was in a suburb. Well, it was. I talked about Brisbane before. It was probably about 6 or 7 kilometres from the CBD, so not out wide. But it was a larger parcel of land. It had an old house on it, on a large parcel of land. It had been there a long time, and the elderly person that owned it had left it to his 2 sons. And I went to meet the 2 sons. It came up for sale by private sale, so that's interesting, not through an agent. So I went and had a talk to them. Lovely guys. These guys are old too, so that house had been there probably 90 years or more. It was on quite a large parcel of land for that suburb. And I had a look at it in terms of the area, and it's a good suburb. I could have put 22 townhouses on it.
Holy, 6 or 7 k's out of town.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was one of those rare large parcels that never really got subdivided. Old mum and dad had stuck with this thing. And but as I walked around and had a look, I could see just down the road a little bit was quite a large culvert that went under the road. And then when I looked around the area, I could see a bit of a V shape, that where water would go and it would feed that culvert. And I'm thinking, I wonder in a high rain event if that just backs up. And so I put it under contract, subject to due diligence. And the first thing I did was order a flood study. And it cost me $3,500, but it was the best insurance I ever had. The 22 potential, and when I say potential, it was zoned right, big enough to fit them. I even got the architect to do a rough schematic for me. And when the report came back, it took about 3 weeks to get the report back, I could only build 3.
Holy Bob.
Yeah, because all the others, the other 19, were below the flood basically the regulation line of where it would flood. And it didn't actually show up on a council search like that, but that's just getting out and having a look at what was around there and what was down the road a bit, and the culvert, and looking at where the water might collect and flow. And
so, Bob, was it a gut feel to get that extra test done, or was it because the project was so big? What made you get the full?
I could see the potential of what it could be. When I looked at the size of that culvert, I thought that takes a lot of water. It wasn't just like a 450 mil pipe that went under the road. It was those big box culverts, and about 3 of them. I thought, man, this must be a really big catchment area to have a culvert that big to take the water under the road and out the other side. And that got me thinking, well, I wonder how much it backs up in a particular rain event, because that's what the engineer calculates. They have a look at a particular rain event and how much water can get away, how fast, and this sort of thing. It's quite it's modelling, medley modelling they use and different things. And look, it came back like that. So I didn't proceed with it. And it came as a real shock to the landowners because they just thought mum and dad had left this, this big parcel of land. It must be worth a lot of money because it's in a build-up area. And really, it wasn't worth much at all.
Unbelievable. And just hearing you say you ordered that extra report and then it didn't go ahead, and we recently had we spent a bit of money looking at something, had to walk away, and that was, we're talking years later from your experience then, so that was a $10,000 walk away from. How much would you have spent in your 40 years of developing on paying for things that saved your butt, but you never got that money back? But had you gone ahead, you would have lost a lot. I've just come up with 13,000 worth in two things. How many would that be?
Look,
rough guess, thumb.
50,000 in 1.3 billion probably. So
okay, so it's not that common.
No, often I don't spend stuff. Like, for instance, if I'm looking at a site and I'm not sure whether it's take 3 or 4 townhouses, I get an architect to knock up a schematic for me just to make sure, look at setbacks and boundaries, turning circles for cars and everything. Usually, because I know them or I've done business with them, they'll do that for free. So I've had a lot of work done for free. And so as you get into property development, get to know consultants, they often do a bit of free work for you.
Because you put a lot of work through
exactly,
them.
Yeah. And so I've had a lot of work done that I haven't paid for. But I've given those consultants, those engineers, architects, town planners, other work. So they're okay to do that. But like, it's cheap insurance. There's sometimes I've simply had to pay. Like, something like a flood assessment report that takes a little while and costs a bit of money, you're not going to get one of them for free. And I didn't expect to get it for free, and I didn't get it for free. I was happy to pay at the time, probably 12 years ago, whenever that was, $3,500, because it was so important to get it done. And I had to write that off. You
had enough red flags. You saw two things were like so big, Yeah,
look, sometimes you may have to spend a little bit of money, but it's insurance, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's why we insure our car. We don't expect to have an accident, but if we have one.
Yeah, good point.
We don't expect to buy a lemon. Let's have let's do the due diligence and not buy the lemon.
That's a great takeaway, Bob, I think, for people listening. When you say it's insurance, and I think, oh, yes, that's right. But when you put it to that's why we insure our car or we insure our house, we hope nothing will go wrong and it's money we outlay in case. I've never thought of it. I just use, it's just insurance. It's just a cost. What you often say is the cost of doing business. But when you say insurance, but then say it's like why we do the car or the house or whatever, I'm not going to say, I see it in a different light now.
It's like, can you deal with the downside? Like, I could have saved $3,500 and punted and gone ahead. Can I deal with the fact that I bought a site for 22 townhouses and can only build 3? I mean, that would have been quite devastating. Can you not insure your car? What's the downside of not insuring your car? It's not just that your car could get written off and you've got to pay for it. What about the other car? And what if they get injured? And what if they sue you and bankrupt you because you don't have any insurance, no third party? What if your house burns down? Well, if it burns down, you've got a mortgage, you've got a problem because you're supposed to keep your insurance up. But, what's the downside? The downside's too huge. Of course you're going to do the due diligence. Of course you're going to spend the, whatever it is, the $3,000 or nothing and get the town planner to look at it. It could be that simple. It could be just the town planner going over stuff and seeing what you've missed.
Bob, I'm hearing a lot of takeaways from insurance to previous fires, all sorts of things.
I've had all of that.
Yeah.
I've had houses burned down your properties burned down during construction. I've gone close to having a property flooded. I haven't actually had one flooded yet.
Oh, don't speak too soon. We've got a development happening down the road, and we've got one up the road. So and we're pre-flood right now. Bob, I want to look at or ask you to talk to me about how you review zoning laws or review planning regulations, and then also when it comes to engaging professionals, what's your due diligence on those two factors? Just
as far as the planning goes.
First of all, when you review things, the planning, and also there's sort of two questions there.
Yeah.
What's your DD on?
Well, you've got to understand at least the principles of planning where you're looking. So that, as I said before, the beauty is you're going to have a patch, right? You're not taking on the whole of Sydney with 35 councils and all different planning schemes. So you're going to be dealing probably with one planning scheme. So no, don't understand every little word of it, but get to understand it. Like I said before, if you want to do townhouses, let's say, well, what's the townhouse zoning that I need to look for? What's the minimum lot size I need to look for? Is there a minimum frontage? Often there is. Get to understand these things. If there's a sewer pipe somewhere, can I build over it or not? Some councils you can, some you can't. So get to understand all those basic things about the town planning. But most importantly, experts. Dig yourself up, find easily done a town planner in your patch that does a lot of development permits and is well connected with council. A decent town planner in your area, that's all I'm saying. So that you can do all you can do, but then, get them to do stuff as well. So, in terms of planning, know as much as you can, but then rely on the experts as well. But of course, you have to know, you almost have to know what you don't know to get the experts involved.
Because if they miss something, then, because at the end of the day, which is a saying that I really dislike, but at the end of the day, the buck stops with you and you are responsible, and there's no point anywhere in your life, whether it's property development or anything, that you go, well, I asked them and I thought they were going to do it, so it's not my fault. If it's yours, it's your responsibility, and the buck stops with you, so technically it is your fault. So, yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and there's a number of consultants you're going to need on the way through, so that's all about building a team.
And Bob, what about the little nitty gritties, like the heritage overlays and the trees and all the other little bits and pieces? What about those when it comes to DD?
Well, you got to, look, you need to become observant. Like, for instance, if a block slopes downwards from the road, can you get a connection to the sewer and can you get the stormwater away? Obvious question, because they're important. These are things you just notice when you look. There's a substantial tree, 2/3 the way down the block behind the old house at the moment. Can I get rid of that tree? That's pretty important. I want to put 3 townhouses here. If I can't get rid of that tree, maybe I can only put 2, and it won't work with 2. So you need to become observant. Just a lot of those obvious things,
The other one with trees, Bob, is neighbours' trees. People aren't always aware that the neighbour's tree can have roots underneath your ground that you can't cut. And that's sort of a bit of a sneaky one if you've got large trees next door, isn't it?
Yeah, and as you say, it could be the neighbours' trees. They might have quite a tree with a large canopy. Let's say it was a jacaranda, and maybe this council won't let you trim back jacarandas much at all, or just a little bit. And so that could infringe. And I've had that happen on an apartment block I did, where you're allowed to. Some people think, neighbours' trees, I can just cut everything off at the fence, because that's my land and you can't have your tree hanging over my land. That's not the way with all councils. And one particular council loved jacarandas for some reason, and they're a lovely tree. I love them too. But you're only allowed to trim them back, I think it was 25%. So, you could trim it back a bit, but it still impacted on the corner of my building. And I lost a unit because of the tree. Now, that didn't kill the deal. It was a big enough project that, I could. But the point is, there's a tree. And I've seen trees completely wipe out a project, technically, because it's not just the tree itself. Is there a tree? Some trees don't matter to council. The species of the tree, it doesn't matter. It's just regrowth. You can knock it down. But then there's some species that you can't necessarily just, remove. Or some trees over a certain size you can't necessarily remove. And it's different with every council. So back to what you were saying, understand what the rules are around trees in your area as well, because while you're out there looking, oh my goodness, there's a big jacaranda in the middle. That could really affect things. You could ask probably ask the town planner. But these are things, like I said, they're just things you observed. So you have to know what to look for as well. It's doing all the basics. That's why you need a good checklist to go through.
Bob, even as you're saying what to look for, you're saying physically look for. And I've got my podcast sort of notes here beside me, and I'm looking through, I'm like, we're going way off track here. But I've just got more and more questions, because what if somebody is doing a development or they're looking at something that they're not near? I finished, mine the year before last over in WA, having not seen it. I had a great JV partner, but people often look at sites that they're not near. They start off online or, are you basically saying that at some point you need to go there and have a look around for those culverts, for all those bits and pieces, you need the physical look. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, I always love to have that physical look. Of course, these days there's so much online that you can do without getting out of your chair, and you might find enough off that to kill the deal. So you don't need to drive there. There's so much you can do these days, as you know, with all there's a lot of free things, Street View, Google Earth and so forth. A lot of council websites. There's lots of things you can do where you can look at, where the services are and what the contours are, the slope. You can pull it out and see how close it is to services and railway stations and all that. So these days there's so much that you can do that I could never do when I started, that you can do before you need to get out of your chair.
So are you really saying that you can do the developments out of state? We do developments out of state, but somebody thinking about doing something out of state, because I know there are areas, some states in Australia that are quite popular right now, and say you don't live in that, are you saying you could do as much DD as possible, then run your feel comfortable, run your fees out, feel more comfortable, then go and have a look physically? Would that be what you would do?
I would, but if it meant doing all of that, I'd probably just engage a local person to just do that final. I mean, I do all the normal checks you do, because you might kill it just from what you find out online, and that's quite possible. I mean, I've killed plenty of deals just looking at, I can't get a sewer connection because I can see where the sewer pipes are. I can see the contours of the land, and I might see, well, the only way I'm going to get a connection is to go through the neighbour. Okay, well, that's I have to get their permission. So I need to talk to the neighbour, things like that. So, and then sometimes you can just kill a deal, as I say, from the comfort of your chair. So you never need to go there. But ultimately, it's good to see it. Or alternatively, because I've got reasonable contacts, I know a lot of people, as we do in different states. I could have some person who knows what they're doing to go and look at the site for me, just to cover off on a few things that I might not know or that I can't find out about online.
I think the key words that you use there are people who know what they're doing. You don't get your nana or your auntie to go and have a look and they go, oh, it looks great. Yeah, remember they'd look emotionally. But yeah, that's really good, pretty solid advice there, Bob. So I just want to let people know that on the 29th of March, we've got our Property Mastermind Masterclass, and that's a 3.5 hour paid event. It's going to be run differently than previous masterclasses, which we've decided to make them a lot more educational, not just talk about the process. We're actually going to, Bob will implement how it works and go through an actual study. So you will learn a lot on this 3.5 hour masterclass. So there will be a link below. There is a minimal fee if you want to attend that, but there is a link below if you'd like to join that. Click the link below, or you could also head on over to our website, propertymastermind.com.au, and get yourself a ticket to that. It will be a great event. So that's on March the 29th, and that will be Sydney time, 9 till 12:30, 1?
Yeah, 12:31, yeah.
Yeah, 9 till 12:30.
Cheap insurance. Could save you.
Yes, it's more of that cheap insurance for sure. Bob, I think we might pull up stumps here, to use words that are yours. I don't think I've ever said that, but you say it quite often. Is there what would be the anything you feel like, have we missed anything that you'd like to mention? Remember, this isn't an exclusive. We haven't got every bit in here because we have a full online course that does that. But what would you like to really impart with people, or get people to really understand your thumb rule of DD?
Start with the things that matter most first. Start with zoning, understand zoning, size, frontage. There's 3 boxes there. Get to understand about service connections, and what I mean by that is to have a look, can you get a connection to sewer, stormwater and so forth? So start from there and learn how to do a feasibility. Get the numbers right. Don't miss things out. I know it's easy to say that, but in this podcast we've been able to touch on a number of things, but like in our workshop, I just think a moment ago in my head, in our workshop or in our course, that due diligence feasibility, I probably spend like 4 hours covering that. So, how deep do you want to go? Well, probably that deep.
Yes, okay. Well, Bob, thanks so much, as usual, a wealth of information. I hope I asked enough questions that I try and think, what questions would a newbie want to know? So I hope I've asked the right ones. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions about what we offer. Otherwise, I think that's it for us. We will catch you next week. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.